In a world where karate, insanity, and gimmicks run rampant, come two podcast hosts who have the audacity and the balls to tell you
you're wrong.
Beyond the Dojo podcast.
Dun, dun.
Okay, I just was thinking about that in my head and I wanted to try it. So I just don't have a deep enough manly voice for it to sound really good. So we should have hired somebody. You know how they have that what's that called, Cameo or whatever? You can hire somebody to do a recording. Next time, guys.
We're getting really fancy with this thing. Whatever happened to us just talking to each other.
Yeah, but it's funny and stuff. Oh, by the way, our last podcast episode
That's kind of funny.
managed to give like half of the families in our dojo a complex because they're like, well, we do that and that and that with YouTube. So, sorry guys, didn't intend for that, but we have had some experience with some crazy YouTube stuff. So.
Absolutely. And in their defense, we weren't talking about y'all because...
Well, some of you we were.
Like, y'all got common sense. You kind of know, what's up and what is expected, and you understand the approach. That's why we're pretty confident when people do look at the YouTube and learn katas or whatever. It's okay because the details is what's lacking, and that's kind of what we emphasize a lot. So, I mean, if you feel guilty,
maybe it is you.
Maybe it is you.
Maybe.
But
we have had some pretty bad experiences with that.
Yeah, but for all those y'all that kind of confronted us about it and talked to us about it, it's not y'all.
Yeah.
It's not y'all.
Yeah. For you guys. Watching you. Alright, so today we're going to do a fun little thing. I'm sure you guys have seen on, I guess maybe on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and other places, and Gary Vee. Overrated and underrated. So we have a short list of things that we feel are overrated, underrated, or properly rated in the karate world. So if you agree or disagree or whatever, you can comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're just listening on the audio version, send us an email. Our email is in the description, so you can tell us how right or wrong you think we are.
But if you disagree, you're wrong.
I'm just kidding. All right, so first one, Kihon. Overrated, underrated, properly rated.
I think it's both overrated and underrated.
Which would mean it's when?
All right, so
properly rated.
If it's in my mind, when it's overrated is when you just do it for what it is. You just make the form. You don't really try to dive in deeper. Your shapes are amazing, but your movement sucks.
Okay.
That to me is overrated. When you take that approach.
Okay.
It's underrated because a lot of people say, oh, it's against the air, it's not really applicable, or it's not effective. And the problem with that is you're not taking the principle that it's trying to teach you and kind of owning up to that. Okay. So there's that.
Okay.
Right? So it's overrated to an extent.
Okay.
It's underrated to a larger extent.
Would you think that would be dependent on the specific group or the dojo or whatever?
Well, a lot of these are dependent on the group and the dojo, let's be real. And more specifically, the teacher.
Right.
So, it is what it is, but I definitely believe it's both, and both scenarios are very common.
I think in the conglomeration of all of it together, it would be properly rated, because there are some people who are like, yes, you need to practice more Kihon. Right. But there's obviously a discussion in some facets of the karate world is what is Kihon at different levels.
Right.
So your Kihon, Steve Ubel says, your Kihon should change as you advance. I think sometimes we get stuck in what we think Kihon is always going to be. Right. Kihon for a white belt is not Kihon for a Nidan or Sandan or above.
Absolutely.
So Kihon just means fundamentals. It doesn't mean a specific shape.
And let's clarify what he referenced by it should change as you move forward. That means it should become more efficient.
Sure. Well,
properly coordinated. Better structure alignment, not exaggerate small nuances of the technique.
Right. Well, even deep, long, low, basic stances, that stuff changes. You become a little bit higher up, and your techniques change, and but that's fundamental for a higher level. So right,
exactly.
Okay, your turn.
Form.
Okay, we just skipped one. All right, form. Do I need to blow it up for you? We can do form. It's fine. Form. Form is...
I think she put the list in a certain order.
No, it's top to bottom. That's usually how we read in America. Top to bottom.
All right, so form.
Okay. That's definitely one that is dependent on your group. And I'm sure we're going to argue on this one. I think right now it's underrated because your form has direct application to your function. If you cannot get the form correctly, you can try to apply it and it'll often fall apart. Now there are moments where that is not true, where things can just so happen to go your way. But if we're talking about like ultimate efficiency, trying to avoid openings on your own body, trying to make sure you can maximize speed and power into a target, then your form is going to dictate your ability to be able to do that. As an example, front stance is to teach you how to move your weight in a forward direction. Now, granted, we also use front stance going backwards, but you still have that forward feeling even though you're going in reverse. If your front stance is, your weight distribution is 50-50, and you're not practicing that weight forward position, obviously that is a form thing. Someone could be static and you could look at them and see that their weight was distributed evenly rather than being forward. That's not really the point. The point is you start with the weight distribution being proper so that you can start to build off of it. So I think it's underrated. That's just one example.
I feel like it's underrated at the beginning and intermediate levels.
Okay.
Because you're still learning fundamental movement, fundamental ideas. You're still learning how to do it, in a sense. I think it's overrated at the higher levels. Like, if you have a great form, but your movement, the time in between each movement or technique or segment coordination is horrible,
sure, then
you're really missing a lot of the whole story, you know? That to me, I hope I'm not going to do this on every subject. I hope I'm going to be definitive one topic. I'm going to be like, no, that sucks.
Well, I think the argument is movement form still form? How you move, is that still encapsulated in form? People often think of form as what you're doing when you're static. But what about when you're moving? Isn't that still form?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I think movement's movement and form is form. And if you're looking
at
the
form of your move, though.
Are you playing wordplay with me?
No, I think it's still form.
You feel that way?
Yeah.
I think movement's movement and form is form.
Okay.
If you're looking at it from a traditional karate aspect and what the language of karate, dojo karate is, that dojo language, then form is the shape and movement is the time in between. So, yeah.
I think the other argument is what kind of form? Is it proper form, or is it what your organization thinks proper form is because someone decided today that's the proper form?
All right, so explain yourself about proper form then.
So that goes back to having an understanding of what is technically going to end up being somewhat functional. Now, there are certain Kihon basic principles that we work with that in real life are not going to be applicable. I'm not going to have a hikite while I'm trying to fight somebody and if on the street or whatever.
Right.
But there are principles that are being learned there. If I'm trying to use that very basic punch, am I able to maximize what I've got in that very basic form? So I don't know. I just think
structural alignment.
I think there are emphases on
posture,
certain like positions and stuff that's more stylistic. I think stylistic and form are not the same, and I feel like a lot of people think they're the same and they're not.
See, I look at it as like stylistic form.
Okay.
Like it's an adjective, not its own entity. But I think it goes to the next best thing, the next topic, understanding anatomy.
That was supposed to be mine to ask you. Remember, because we were flipping back and forth. Understanding of anatomy.
Run with it.
Okay.
Since you made that statement just 2 seconds prior, I thought it'd be a great one for you to do.
It's underrated. I think, actually, it's coming. I'm sure I speak for a lot of people who are in the science realm. It's slightly annoying when people are, and I get people are trying to do the best they can with the knowledge that they have, but when you're trying to use scientific terminology or scientific terms and you either misrepresent them or you don't understand what you're saying, you use the wrong word. It might be a small thing to you, but if someone is like if the most succinct way to describe something is to use like anatomical descriptors, so like where it is on the body, how close to the midline, how close to the outside, like that's generally the best way to describe something. If you get that wrong, sometimes that's an issue. But then to a point, even though we didn't write it on there, understanding of not only anatomy, but also the function of that anatomy, so a little bit of kinesiology, you know, I think that is highly beneficial, because then we are able to stay away from more gimmicky things, and because we have a better understanding of how the body works. It's actually a little bit simpler sometimes than we make it out to be. So I think that's why definitely underrated.
I would absolutely 100% agree with you. I think it's completely underrated, and I'm guilty of it myself, because before I went to massage therapy school and had spent a lot of time in anatomy classes, I misunderstand not only the ideas and the muscles that we were talking about, but their functions and what they do. And it just, once you understand the body at a basic level, you understand your technique even at a more higher level, in a sense of like what you're actually doing. And some of the things that, you know, people pass on as teaching is anatomically, kinesiologically wrong. It doesn't work that way. And it would avoid you going down those rabbit trails. You know, and I'm guilty of it. I'll be the first one to tell you. I'm guilty of misunderstanding muscle movement and how they work. So, you know, I agree with you. Absolutely underrated.
Okay. All right. So function.
What is karate without your intent?
So wait first. Overrated? Underrated?
Oh, my bad.
So what we're doing?
Underrated.
Okay.
Absolutely underrated.
Okay.
And it's because what is your intention? What is karate to you? And what's going on? Now, am I saying that one function of karate is better if there's only one function of karate? No, there's not.
Like a karate movement?
Well, let's just look at karate overall.
Okay.
If your function of karate is to be a sport, then that's what it is.
Okay.
And then your approach to that is what is going to give you the best possibility to win. That is the function of that karate. Don't act like since you're really good at sport karate, that you're a great self-defense person, because the function of that karate is completely different. And that's where I feel like people are making this mistake. They go, oh, my function of karate is to win a world championship, and then since I won a world championship, I'm very successful, it kind of translates over to all this other stuff that might be more martial. And to me, that's just completely hogwash. Because the focus and the understanding and your perspective of what those movements do and how they're supposed to be performed are completely different. So function is completely underrated in that sense to me.
Okay.
That makes sense? Like, because, I mean, if your function of karate was just to get high rank belt, right? Then what you end up doing is at a certain level, you start to adhere to organizational stylistic preferences. Yeah. And now your function is just to get that rank within that organization, right? Which means it could be self-defense, it could be application, it could be a lot of things, but it's limited to what that organization is and what it represents. Okay. So to me, on both sides of the spectrum, you can't be a self-defense martial artist or someone who focuses just on the martial aspect of it and think you're going to go and win tournaments, because you're not. Because obviously the distancing, timing, everything is different. So function depends on your perspective, and the problem I have with that is that it's very often they let it just kind of go and be this universal thing, and it's not. You know, you're limiting your karate because you think the function of your karate is universal, and it's not. I mean, there's subtle differences and there's subtle emphasis that has to be recognized and respected. All functions is karate, yes, but they're not universal. Right. So that's my opinion on function. Okay. Yeah, because
No, I don't really have. You went a different direction than what I thought you were, but you kind of covered everything, so I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah. Application training.
See, this one kind of depends. I'm going to go ahead and say overrated, only because I feel like your understanding of application will come with proper form and function. So if you don't have that, then yeah, your application is overrated, because if you really don't have an understanding of how your body's supposed to move in the first place, you're not going to be able to apply that. Now, if you do have that down, but you just haven't pushed past that point, then yeah, it's a little bit underrated. You really need to start getting to the point where you're doing more application stuff. So that is another one of those, like, it depends. But I think more than anything, application, like, this is something that Steve Wubel says all the time, is that applications training is supposed to be built off of solid fundamental principles, which are really difficult to get down pat, much less master. So, you know, it is good to obviously get into it, but sometimes it's easier to understand your application if you understand the proper movement better, if that kind of makes sense. What do you think?
Application, in my mind, and what I've seen is overrated.
Okay. Yeah.
Because what you see people doing as application generally is just demonstrated on someone who's compliant. So I'm more of it. When you talk about application, there has to be an element of someone not complying to what you're doing. So if you're just throwing one punch, excuse me, and then your application does like 20 moves on that one punch, it's unrealistic. There has to be a realism to your application training. Okay. Now, saying that, it's very difficult to have that kind of training because a lot of times your partner, they're not going to try to knock you out or try to hurt you. They're not going to have that same aggression. So there's always an element of lacking there.
Okay.
So it's overrated in that sense. Okay. Secondly, it's overrated because a lot of times when you watch people show application, it's geared towards their strengths and their perspective and not to true technique.
Preach on, brother.
You know what I'm saying? So, for example, if I were to give an example of application and said this is the only way, it wouldn't work for Lauren. Because my application will gear towards my strengths, my abilities, and my body structure, in a sense, my size.
You just don't understand until you're a midget. Okay.
Right. So to have that universal,
no offense to midgets,
universal view of how it can work, it's limited. Now, if someone says, "Yeah, this is what I do in that move because of my strengths," then that's understandable and respectable.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like not, but if you sell it off as universal, I'm gonna almost immediately scoff at you because it's like your body type is different, your movement's different. You know, your perspective on how it should work is different. You know, and no disrespect to Steve, but even at Steve's seminars, there's people that are like, look, he's way taller than me or he's way stronger than me. I can't do that move. And Steve literally goes, yes, I agree with you. You have to do these things to make it work because your size.
Right.
You know what I mean? And he changes it subtly. I mean, it's very little change.
Or he'll add in something before.
He'll add in something else to make it work. Then you go, oh, then it's kind of universal.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I don't see that a lot. I don't see where someone says, this is what I'd like to see. And then have these slight little variations for different body size, strength, and abilities.
So it's not just your body size, it's also the attacker's body size.
Absolutely.
Because me defending against someone my own size versus someone your size is not the same at all. So like any applications that you do on someone who's like a normal medium-sized person, I can do on someone who's my size.
Right.
It's whenever I'm against someone who's bigger than me, that's the issue.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I will say this, from my own experience, it is so much easier demonstrating application on someone my size or bigger for me. But when I go to do if Lauren's my uke, I get so crowded in my technique and my movement, and I rely purely on my strength. Because it's not the ability that happens, it's the structure and how you align to your opponent's structure that is an issue. So, dude, you know.
I just want to say that on my Sandan exam, I knew that I could crowd people, so I did that on purpose.
Well, yeah, that should be part of it.
Because I have little arms and little legs, and it scared the living hell out of them, and it was awesome.
Yeah, that's part of karate too, is knowing your strength and weakness. Let's be real. That is part of the progression, is knowing what you can and cannot do. And then taking advantage of it, because you know it works.
Yeah.
So.
You just have to also not get hit while you're in there, so by the way. Just in case you were wondering. All right, movement, underrated, overrated?
Underrated. And on the full, that to me is covers all spectrum of karate functions.
So you mean all of the space between the stationary?
Yeah, so let's say from one kime point to another. Down block, reverse punch. The movement is the rotation of the hips, driving of the rear leg, and the extension of the elbow. All that is movement to me.
Yeah.
Right?
So
Step and punch. One punch to the other. That space in between, what you're doing in between that,
yeah.
is so underrated. And if you disagree with me, go to any one of your favorite YouTube karateka and go to that little box and slow that film down to like quarter speed. And you watch them.
And keep the audio on because it's really funny.
Yeah, well, the audio is kind of funny. But and watch what their body does. And if you can't see the inefficiencies or the subtle little differences that they're doing, the bad habits they're talking about, they somewhat happen to reveal themselves at slow motion.
Or if they're really good, you don't see that.
You don't see that.
It's the same whether it's fast or slow. It just looks slower.
Exactly.
So.
And that to me is the essence of movement, is the ability to, if you're going fast or slow, it doesn't matter. Your body does the same thing.
Right.
So
efficient movement.
Definitely underrated.
Yeah.
Definitely underrated.
I agree. And you know, we've obviously, over the years, we've had that discussion between like form and movement. You say function sometimes when we have that conversation. That's the reason I thought function was going to get a different route, but what you mean is movement.
Right.
And I get that. So the way that I came up, a lot of it was focused on form, but how I got between one stance and another stance, one position and another position, there's no telling what was going to happen in between there. And it's very difficult to correct movement. It's easier to correct a specific form when someone is stationary because you can see it all. Once they start moving between movements, then it's a lot harder. Yeah. Now, granted, if they have good form, if they have a good stationary form, it's more likely they're going to stay within that good form by the time they get to the next position. Not in every case, but it is more likely rather than them having really bad form. But yeah, I think we've both kind of gotten to the point where we've converged on that, where it's like you have to have both. Yeah. You have to be able to have good stationary movement, but that's to teach, or stationary position, but that's to teach you good movement, or like a starting or ending point of good movement.
I would say like form is that starting point, and if you have poor starting point, then you're going to have poor movement.
Right.
You know, and then
an ending point.
And if form is the ending point, it is a result of good or bad movement. You know, it's easier to be in good form if you have good movement.
But also control at the end of the move.
Yeah.
So actually breaking properly.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, your turn.
Hirote gis.
I don't actually know what people think of them. I think properly rated. I like them. I have one. My only complaint was, I think I got my measurements wrong because I have like saggy poopy butt britches on the gi pants. I have to tie them way up like around the bottom of my rib cage in order for the butt to not sag on the pants. But I think it dries quickly. It cleans pretty well. Mine's not as pretty and white as it used to be, but we also have, some iron water in this area, so it's not, gonna be the cleanest. But I think they're fantastic. I really love the top just because of how it sits, but I like it.
In general, Japanese gis like the Tokaido, the Hirotas, they all tend to be too tight around the shoulder for me and too narrow in the shoulder to shoulders. My chest is broad, so they tend to be tight fitting to me. So I like them, and that's what I grew up in. But I always had to have like these super large sizes for them to feel comfortable.
So then you look like you're wearing a.
Yeah, it looks like I'm wearing something way big. As a child, it wasn't that bad because they'd fit just slightly larger. But as a full grown man, it's not.
Like you're wearing a dress.
It's not the most appealing. It's not
form fitting.
Right, but I'll say this though. I had an Adidas gi for the longest time, and it was one of those long, like long bottom part of the thing, and it was really, really loose fitting. But it was just form fitting enough to where it didn't look like I was wearing a sweater or a vest or something. It felt really good, and I wore that thing for years because it just felt really good. And my point's going to be made this: I think if Hirota or Tokaido or any of these other Japanese gi makers were to take their time and design gis that fit body styles and types that were not traditionally Japanese, they would be fine. It's just that they have a template, and it seems like that template only fits smaller, skinnier people.
I think you're supposed to insert your... Like, we did insert our measurements. I'm not 100% sure if we went the proper route, but I thought they were tailor making it, so it could be that we did that wrong. I don't know.
It could be, but I mean, traditionally, if you ask anybody, hirota or tokagis, they tend to be tight around the shoulder. You know, they tend up in the armpit, right? And they tend to be really narrow across the chest. So there's things like that kind of irritate me. So
they're not made for linebackers.
No, they're not. And I've never. I mean, if you have a lineman's body, offensive lineman's body, you definitely, you want to definitely go with a different brand.
Yes. All right. Strength training, underrated, overrated.
I'm guilty of this. It's underrated. It is absolutely underrated. If you have the proper strength training program and with the correct intention, it can absolutely improve your karate. And for example, been doing your online strength training thing, and I've been a little bit more consistent with it. And the areas you focused on has really made a difference. Like last night, kicking the bags and stuff, I felt so much more grounded, so much easier to bring my leg up and do the correct moves, and knew I was doing it properly. So, I fight a lower back problem constantly. I have a L4, L5 bulging discs, and it never really completely goes away. It can be flared up on occasion, and it really limits my movement. I have to rely on the strength of my glutes and my muscles down there in the glute area to kind of control me better. And so I'm realizing that strength training in karate is definitely underrated, because a lot of times guys, they'll do the push-ups and the jumping jacks and the burpees and all this stuff.
And the weighted vests and wrist weights.
And weighted vest, wrist weights, which are beneficial. They are absolutely beneficial, but if you have problem areas and you're fighting through these issues that are going to be lifelong, then you have to have a proper training schedule, a proper training regimen, because just doing your typical karate exercises and what you did as you're coming up through karate is not going to be sufficient. Just not going to be sufficient. You're going to be in good shape, yes, but are you going to be able to perform at a level consistently when you're battling hip issues,
right,
knee issues,
right,
elbow issues, lower back issues? They're very common injuries in karate, and we have to have the proper regimen for them.
Right. We're talking about supplementary, like resistance training, using weights, going to a gym if you need it, doing stuff around your house, even with dumbbells. You don't have to have a ton of equipment. That's what we're referring to, by the way, because some people don't understand what strength training means.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
There you go. I wanted to also point out, you talked about the past couple of days that your glutes have been sore, and then yesterday the compliment that you received is that your hand-hip rotation timing was better, and that is highly predicated upon having good firing activity in your glutes. Yeah. So I felt like that was a win.
Yeah. Well, anytime we get a compliment, it's a win.
Right.
No matter what.
But being able to feel certain muscles firing, that's one of the best things, I think, from strength training. That's why I feel like it's so underrated, is like it can teach you so much about your body, just incorporating that as supplementary training. I mean, it's unbelievable. And it's part of the reason that high-level athletes all do it.
Right. And I'm not talking about working out every day, dude. I've been slowly getting better, but I try to go every other day. And I try to just do that amount, nothing more, nothing less, because I tend to go, I'm going to work out, and then I just work out until I can't work out anymore, and then for the next week I can barely walk. And I haven't had that feeling at all with the workouts you've been putting out on there, because it's like, I'm sore and I'm tender, but I'm able to function still.
He's tender.
Yes. And I'm going to be honest also, I hate working out. I hate lifting weights. I hate doing all that stuff. It is a mental fight for me. I can't. I don't get into it. I don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
But at least this way lately, I can see the benefits, and that makes it worthwhile to me. It's like I could put myself through this. I hate this hour, but if it helps my karate in the long run, it helps me move better, and it helps me kind of like, I notice that I'm upright better, my posture's better, I'm not slouching. I can feel like things more engaged, so
yeah,
the benefits outweigh it, so I'm kind of getting over it.
Holla. Your turn.
Ghee snapping sound.
When I was a kid, this was I guess there's still a thing right now, but especially when I was a kid, we were always told that we're trying to make our gi make that sound, and we totally thought it was the coolest thing ever. Like, we want gis that make sounds. I literally had a student come up to me the other day, and she's like, "Can I get a gi like yours? Because I want a gi that makes sounds." Way to go. AC is on. Phone's ringing.
Sorry. Sorry, guys.
So,
I'm an idiot.
talking about watching instructors in slow-mo on YouTube, go watch some of your favorite instructors on YouTube and see if they slap their geese.
Ooh.
Because some of them does, and that's why they have all that snappy sound. It's not because they're actually snapping their gi. And to be honest with you, this snapping sound, in some cases it depends on the fabric of the gi, but depending on how you're moving, in a lot of cases your gi really shouldn't make a lot of sound, because that means that you're snapping the joint. You're actually snapping one of your joints, and you don't want that kind of thing to happen depending on the type of movement. Mm-hmm. So, some cases you'll have that sound just because of the gi. You can't really help it. Some cases you really shouldn't have a lot of sound.
Well, I'll say this about snapping gi sound. Yeah? Yeah. If you're trying to make the gi snap, you're doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. Back in the day when I was a kid and going up to the dojo, the gi pop sounded different than the gi slapping. Mm-hmm. And when you do good technique and it's got a little bit of a snap, like if the technique requires snapping, mm-hmm. then there's a pop to it that sounds genuine. Mm-hmm. And it kind of like we used to use it as a tool as like, okay, you're getting towards the right way. You're getting to a point where you're moving your body to the point where it sounds good, it's sharp and crisp, and your gi is responding to it.
Crispy.
Yeah. Now, that was in Japan, mm-hmm. and there was no emphasis on power or speed. It was on technique and movement. Mm-hmm. And there has to be a little bit of speed to make that sound, but at the same time, no one was trying to make the sound. It just it was a part of the process. It was a stepping stone to know that I'm getting closer to what I need to do.
Okay.
Right? Generally, that never happened until brown, almost black belt.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that attitude that your power and your speed came from the sound of your gi, I really didn't run into that until I came back to the States and was training in American dojos. Uh-huh. And I was guilty of it for a little bit, especially when I was competing in tournaments, that subtle little slap on the side. I mean, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do those things. And because it was they wanted that sound because they thought the sound was good. In reality, if you knew what the proper sound of what your gi sound like popping, it's not the sound. It's not the same sound.
Loud.
It's not as loud, and it's not as solid. It's a very echo and hollow sound. So,
if anybody has a video of someone doing that gi slap and actually like hurting themselves, I would love to see it. That would be so funny.
After a while of training, what I noticed was like if you slapped your gi right above your belt would be slightly dirty and slightly darker than the rest, and that's generally not a spot where you have sweat stains.
Tell on ya. Mm-hmm. All right, last one, Jeremiah. Spirituality. Overrated, underrated, properly rated. Even though we did an entire episode on this.
It's overrated at a higher rank.
Okay.
I feel like and I'm not calling everybody out that has a spiritual approach because that's not the truth. I feel like some people put the spirituality into it because they don't have true answers. Mm-hmm. And that's not true at all, because there are people in karate that have a higher level and are very spiritual, but their entire life is spiritual. They mm-hmm. are who they are, and that's who they portray. They're revealing who they are, not trying to portray a certain mm-hmm. aura about themselves. Because there's a lot of people that just fake it.
Sure.
Just absolutely fake it, because when you're around them, when the cameras are off or whatever, or they're not in front of a class, you're like, you're not acting the way you're telling everybody else to act, mm-hmm. And there's this whole thing about it, and just, it gives guys that are generally took that path mm-hmm. and generally achieved something in that realm mm-hmm. that a bad name.
Yeah.
I will say this though, karate without any kind of spiritual cultivation, I'm not talking about religious belief, but right. a cultivation of your spirit, mm-hmm. of who you are as a human being. If you don't have that, you're lacking.
Right.
You're absolutely lacking, because all you've learned is movement and technique and all this other stuff, and you've learned nothing and done nothing for you as a human being.
Well, we've talked about the development of spiritual characteristics, like developing your character
Right.
as a karateka. So your self-discipline, your ability to control your anger, your relationships with other people, a lot of that is cultivated in the dojo floor, in the crucible that is the dojo, because there's just so much pressure there. So there is a spiritual element to karate, whether you like it or not. It's not, like we said, it's not like a Zen, like, meditation thing necessarily. It's not
Walking on
necessarily
water.
a religious thing.
Right.
It is actually like if you talk about the spirit of karate or the spirit of the room, or like your team has, or your school has team spirit or whatever, like that kind of like camaraderie and togetherness and oneness, and also like being able to train cohesively within a group of people while still being different and being your own person. I think that's part of training. So in that respect, that definition of spirituality is underrated. But the very gimmicky, we have to do this thing because this is what our guru master says, that's overrated.
Yeah. I agree with you. Absolutely. To me, karate and spirituality is it's a personal thing. Mm-hmm. It's an internal thing. Mm-hmm. And it changes you as a human being. It humbles your spirit. Mm-hmm. A lot of times the guys that truly have been changed by training, mm-hmm. they have this humility to them that's not, it's always with them. And no matter what situation they're in, they're humble about it. They're not boastful, or they don't have an ego from it. It's just, it is what it is. And mm-hmm. they get that attitude of like, it's not like it is what it is, but more like it's very simple. They state their understanding and they move on. They don't add to it. They don't try to take away from other people. It is what it is. This is what I have. This is my understanding. Right. Everybody has ego, and everybody should have some ego. Right. It's a natural part of your human spirit. But the guys that are truly like matured in their spiritual approach to karate or martial arts and all, keep their ego in check pretty well. They know that they have one, and they keep it in check. Mm-hmm. They self-regulate. Right. And that to me is the sign of a true mature martial artist. Mm-hmm. Is that they know their weaknesses, they know their own downfalls, and they're like, you know what, I'm trying to keep myself at a certain level and a certain understanding and a certain approach. Mm-hmm. And they do that constantly. Mm-hmm. And that's part of it. Do you have to go to a Zen master to learn it? No, you don't. It's not a religion. It is seriously just a self-development thing. You honestly have to look at yourself and cultivate that attitude, cultivate that approach. Mm-hmm. Then it doesn't become a display. It is who you are. And that to me is that part of spirituality is completely underrated. Now, if you claim to walk on water, you're overrated.
You a lie.
You a liar.
All right, what you working on?
Leg drive, hip timing, and punch timing from Fudodachi to Gyakuzuki, Zenkuzudachi Gyakuzuki. It's Chinte still. It's just a part of that. And I got a compliment last night talking about how well it had improved. But then I was embarrassed because it took a lot of mental concentration, a lot of like slowing it down to get it right. Mm-hmm. And that's not mastery of a technique. A technique that's mastered should come out like your breath. Mm-hmm. Of how, just naturally doing it. So it's a milestone, but it's also the next stage where now I got to rep it out relentlessly until it becomes a new habit. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like I could brag about it. Yeah. But until then, I was embarrassed, to be honest. I was embarrassed to know that it should be natural and easy because that's what was required. And I knew it wasn't natural or easy. Right. It's very difficult for me to kind of to time it and slow down in my own head. Mm-hmm. So, gotcha. What you working on?
Chinte. Fudodachi, apparently, still. Because that stance is just insane. Hip hand timing, definitely still. It's a little bit better, but some of it's still off. It's amazing how difficult that is. Because over the years, like, I've known for a long time that my punch timing with whatever the driver is, whether it's reverse punch and it's being driven by your back leg and your hip rotation, or if it's step and punch and it's been driven by your back leg and the forward momentum. I've known that the timing was off, but it's amazing like how many different places and loops and crazy stuff I've gone through to try to develop this. I mean, this has been, what year is this? This has been a 10-year process at this point. Over a 10-year process at this point. Adding that stance transition from Fudodachi to front stance makes it harder because it's like it's not really a bigger path, but for some reason moving your legs rather than them being stationary and fixed also makes it harder. So that's obviously a tell that it wasn't quite right to begin with. But it's amazing because so many people have the problem of turning their hip and shoulders before their hand, so there's nothing driving their hand. We're doing your hand is moving and then your hips are coming after, so there's nothing driving at the beginning. So getting it all to move together has been difficult. And then I guess other things like just general positions in the kata still, transitioning between positions and not popping up, not moving back and forth, just trying to keep my torso and hips controlled as I'm making those transitions. So, that kind of stuff. Luckily, nothing's hurting, so that's a good sign. Yeah. Because sometimes after I rep out a kata for a while, I start getting some aches and pains, but
not yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's funny, though, because the corrections you were talking about are the corrections that most teachers give their beginning students. Intermediate students. And no, I'm not trying to put No, I'm not trying to say that, but it's the representation that you're not really learning anything new. You're refining what you know already. And that's kind of where we're at, where it's like, I know I could step forward and punch, and I know I could do it. I can make the shapes, but am I doing it at a high level? No, I'm not. I'm missing points. I'm missing, key points, key highlights. And that, I wish more people would understand that that's what advanced karate is.
I think the argument is whether or not that is an advanced concept that we haven't gathered yet, or if it's a basic concept that we haven't gathered yet.
Well, I think the concept is, the principle is basic. Right. But we haven't performed it at a advanced level yet. Okay. That's what I'm trying to get at. Sure. Is you're not advancing concepts. Mm-hmm. You're advancing performance of basic concepts. Okay.
In this case, yeah.
And honestly,
in a lot of cases.
In a lot of cases. Yeah. In a lot of cases. It's rare to see someone do some other craziness and understand that there are advanced concepts also. Mm-hmm. But if we can't do the basics, then why even waste your time?
Right on.
So, yay.
All right, that was great.
Don't hate us.
We'll see you guys next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.